Hi everyone, my name is Corey Franson. I'm the Assistant Director for the Elk River Area Schools ISD 728 Community Education Program. Hopefully you're watching this video because you attended my session at Leadership Days 2016 where I presented on using data and technology to help drive programming decisions. This video is going to show you a little bit more on how to use the Google Drive or Excel documents to take some of that data and do some of that manipulation to show you some of the things that we talked about in class. So the first thing that you'll do is the link that you had in the very bottom of your document that I shared with you in class is this link. When you go to enter that in the very first time, it's going to give you this message that you need permission. I decided I wanted to actually give you the actual document because then you can look at the formulas that I had built. If I uploaded it as a PDF or only gave you view access to it, you wouldn't be able to click on the cells to see how some of those formulas worked. So I encourage you to do that. Push this button here that says request access. What will happen then is an email comes to me saying that you are interested. I just click to authorize that you have access to that document. You'll then be able to open it up. It's going to be this document that you see here in front of you. The difference is that some of the things that we're going to actually work on building here together are going to be things that you'll see in the document by the time we're done with this video. So what you have in front of you is an example of the data that I have compiled from our registration system. Yours may look a little bit different depending on how you can pull data, but basically what I did is I pulled this out of our registration system, downloaded it into Excel, then was able to copy paste all that content here into a Google Doc. Just because I found more programs are using Google Docs than Excel these days, and honestly, if you ask me, the system is a little bit easier to do for some of this data manipulation. So one of the things that we're going to get started on here is we're going to talk about what do you do to help have access to sort through some of your content. Now the different headers here, some of the ones that I indicated in the class are the ones that are really good to pull on a regular basis because they'll give you a lot of information on informing class decisions. So one of the things I like to do right away in the Google Drive world, in the spreadsheets here, up in the top corner you have this opportunity to grab these bars and pull them down. What that's going to do is essentially what it's called is freezing the row. So you'll notice now cell 1, 2, and as I move my cursor up, 3 is going to start to disappear. That way I can always see the headers. Similarly, I'm going to grab this one and pull it over next to the class title. So as I'm scanning across these different class options, I can still see the class that I'm looking at that's over here on the one side. Another feature that's really nice about the Google system that you can certainly do in Excel as well is you have this ability that as I mouse over the very top of the cursor here, you'll notice that little arrow pops up. I have the ability in here that I can sort. So you notice right now I've sorted by all what we call active. That means a class is a go. If I sort from bottom up, so from reverse order, you'll notice now our canceled classes are on top. Just a nice system that does a quick sort of your whole sheet. So if you're looking at things like you want to see which class brought in the most revenue over a certain time, or a class that maybe had the most total registrations, you can always have that ability to quickly do that sort too in some of these different areas. One thing I also recommend that you can do is to be able to sort by your categories and be able to kind of start to look a little bit more deeply at some of your individual subsets and see how those compare to each other over a given time. That'll be able to give you information like what you might have noticed in the class that I shared, where you can start to compile reports that give you full areas of your different programming over certain times, and then also be able to kind of give you a compiled list of how your programs did completely over those same data sets that you pulled. I didn't pull a full season to make sure that the document was short that we were looking at. So what you have in front of you is actually a compiled document of just a shortened time frame that we had here in our adult programs. So one of the first things that we're going to do is try to figure out how many classes we ran that were active and how many classes we ran that were inactive. So the first thing I'm going to do is notice down here in the bottom, I made a new tab for you that's called Formulas. In Formulas, it has a lot of these different formulas that you can actually input into the document. We'll talk a little bit how to do that as we go. But one thing I just want to make sure everybody remembers is as you're entering in a formula, you always have to hit the equal sign in the cell that you want the number or the formula result to appear. I can't type those into a single cell, otherwise they disappear because formulas stay kind of out of sight. You'll see that in a second. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go for just doing a count of how many active classes we have and canceled classes that we had. the way that works is that we are going to use a formula called COUNTIF. So essentially what it's going to do is say every time that the cell that we've indicated has the words that we've indicated in it, it's going to count that as a 1. So I'm going to copy this, I'm going to go back over to that sample data sheet, and next to this status column, I'm going to go in and say insert a column to the right. I'm going to call this one active, and just for the purpose of saving time, I'm going to insert another one and call this one canceled. Now what I'm going to do is, remember, hit that equal sign first, and now I'm going to paste in my formula. Now the thing I'm going to have to do to be careful here is this cell I'm going to have to change. So where it says A2, that's telling it right now to pull whatever's in this information. I actually want that to be this cell, E3. So now you'll notice if I go back here, I have to delete that and enter in that cell. So now our formula is actually reading that if the cell E3 has the word active in it, count that as a 1. So you'll notice I have a 0 because that does not have the word active in it. Something that's really cool about the Excel and the Google Drive world is I can now take this cell, highlight the cell, and hit the copy key. Then I drag down through my entire space, and I just hit the paste button, and it's going to apply that formula, as you can see here, to the exact cell that was in front of it. So it's actually taking it and just applying the standard of what your formula was to that grouping. So I'm going to do the same thing over here now. I'm going to say equals, I'm going to copy this, copy it over here, and I'm going to say, now the wording I'm going to change is instead of active, I want it to say canceled. And I need to change F3 to this cell here again. So now that's working the way I want it to. So I'm going to say copy, same scenario, apply to this whole range. Now the cool part about the way this system works is there's also some shortcuts that Excel and Google Drive spreadsheets have built in for you. So to get a running total up here at the very top, I'm going to say I want to know the total number of active classes within that column. I'm going to highlight again all the content here. And because I put in the formula equals sum and then this total, it'll now give me an accumulative total up here on the top. This shortcut up here where it says functions, this is where you have some of those other options for those different functions that you can do. By all means, Google search those and figure out some of the cool shortcuts that they can be. Now, the really neat part about this is, again, very similar to the way I did the active and canceled where I was able to continue them down the row. I can actually copy this cell again now and paste it into the cell right next door, and it's going to tell me the same, again, format. So this is telling me that I had 68 active classes and 13 canceled. Now for the purposes of what we're going to work on today, I'm going to say I want to insert another one, and I want to know my cancellation percentage. I'm going to take my canceled classes divided by my active plus my canceled classes. So again, I'm going to copy this, come back over, and up here in the very top where I have the cancellation percentage, I'm going to say equal sign and paste in that formula. So these, again, I'm going to have to replace. So my canceled classes is my cell G1, and this one, again, is that cell I had to replace, was G1, and this one was my active classes. So I need my F1. That's going to now give me a percent. If the percent didn't show up initially, you just need to highlight the cell and click the percentage button right here, and then move your decimal places as you see fit. So now we know I had 68 classes run over a given time with 13 that canceled, which gave me a 16% cancellation rate, which is, kind of the butter zone that we're looking for, somewhere between that 15 to 20. So I know I'm doing okay there. Again, one of the neat things about this is, again, this column here had our total registration. If I actually copy this cell over here that I had the active and canceled total and paste it in here again, it's going to, again, total that entire column again. So now I know I have 603 total participants during that time. My total wait list, it looks like I had 11 classes that I had on my wait list for that given time. If I keep scrolling down here a little bit, my fees, that would be the individual cost of the class, but my actual revenue I'd really like to know as a total, and I'd also like to know what my total expenses were as well. So now what I can tell is I want to figure out what my actual revenue and my expenses were. So I'm going to call that one profit and loss and market share. So the formula that I'm going to use for this one is I'm going to go to this profit loss, so I'm basically going to take the profit cell minus the expense cell. Go back over to my data sheet, So it's essentially going to be an equal sign, and I want to take my actual revenue, which is my profit, minus my expenses, and that's going to give me a total. Now again, this was an easy one because it was 0 and 0. So what I'm going to do is copy that, apply it to the entire row, and then I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to copy this, paste it here. So I know that of my total revenue minus my expenses, this is the amount of profit and loss that I had over that given amount of time. There are some other formulas that I think are going to be really helpful for you over here. Market share is one of the really tough ones to figure out. Basically, the way that we're using it is defined by Learn is saying it's basically your top classes that bring in the top 50% of your revenue over a given time. So what we're using that concept for is we actually take and we sort this column by highest to lowest. So I see the class that brought in the most amount of profit, and then go down to where the total amount is. And I know that I offered, it ended at cell 66. So at cell 66 is exactly where my last class was. What we do then is we take half and go halfway in the middle. So in this case, I'm going to go 33. So I'm going to go all the way up to 33. It'll be essentially cell 34. And I'm going to color these columns all in a red hue. And I'm going to take everything up to the rest of the top. And that's going to tell me which programs are in my top market share. We'll come back to that in a minute to talk about how that will work. Some of the other things that you can kind of quickly figure out, again, are looking at things like your total participation or average participation per class, which is where you'd be taking your total registrations and dividing by the total amount of active classes that you had. Same with your average fee. You're going to take your actual revenue and divide that by the total amount of participants that you have. Those are really good numbers that you can kind of see in the full-size data sheet that can really drive you to see some interesting information. As an example, with arts, we know we had a 17% cancellation percentage. We had 73 participants during a given time. The average participants per class was just under 5 total revenue, the percentage of revenue from our total budget, and then the average participant fee during that time. You can start to see how a lot of that information can really start to change and grow the type of programming that you want. Okay, what we're going to talk about now is being able to compare that market share and the growth over a given time. What we like to do with this system, and again, this is totally up to you if this works for you or not, but we'll take the individual categorical seasons. So we pull things by our brochure season. So maybe I'm comparing spring classes to spring classes. What we'll do is take all of that information, and then we also have one massive data sheet that we're just tracking on how individual class performance is doing over time. So as an example, I used what we had here and just changed some of the registration numbers so you can see how it works. But what we did is we then take and we dump that into a full data spreadsheet that has every one of the classes that we offered over a length of time with that market share information on the side. What we'll then do is go back to that sample sheet for that given time set. I'll copy all the new information in after I've input the new market share information. Copy that. Bring it back to the class analysis, put it down at the very bottom of the document, and then what we'll do is we go in and we're going to sort by class title. So this is one of those areas where it's kind of nice if you have the availability to do some way to sort by your classes other than necessarily the official class title like I just did. It might be by class ID. Maybe that's a similar way to look at that. The reason I recommend that is there's better, it's really a best practice to have the opportunity to change your course title as one of your strategies that might bring in more participants. So in that case, if we've got something called the 24 Fit Boot Camp, as an example, these here, the boot camp mix and mingle, it won't necessarily be compared class over class to the 24 Fit Boot Camp. So the problem being then that you might have something here that if we would decided to call it Boot Camp 24 Fit, I've now got something categorically that's way down here in the B area that might not be as helpful. So a good practice to do with this process is to sort first by your date range, then go by class. That way everything that's by class is at least secondarily sorted by the date range as well, which is going to be very helpful. Then what we do is we go down here to the column next to the market share, and we call this one growth. The formula that I showed you here is to take the growth and compare it to the class essentially that's right above it. Some of this is going to have to take a little bit of going in and kind of checking class one by one. But essentially you're taking the class where it currently was at minus the time that it ran right before that. So we're going to go back here to the class analysis, and in this second cell I'm going to say I want to compare the participation from this class minus the time that it ran right before that. So in this session, I know that essentially I got one more registrant than the time I offered the class right before that. So I have a growth of 1. Again, I'm going to copy that formula and paste it throughout the entire document. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something that's called conditional formatting. So I'm going to highlight this cell, and I'm going to go into where it has the fill color, and I'm going to go down to where it says conditional formatting. In conditional formatting, I'm going to apply a couple different scenarios. I'm going to say if it's in column SS and the cell is greater than the number 1, we'll call it 0, I guess. That's probably a good idea. And the fill color, we're going to make it that same nice green. So anytime there's a number essentially in the positive, so if there was growth over that time, it's going to now be indicated that it's green. I'm going to add another new rule and say that essentially any time that it is less than 0, that cell I want to be that red again. So now you can see it automatically applied those numbers to the entire document that we went through. What we then do is we go through the document and essentially put in a space every time that there's a new class. So example, this abundance, we've only offered that once, so I'm actually going to delete that because I don't want to compare, I want to make sure I'm comparing apples to apples essentially. So this first time with a keto too, that one doesn't really count because it's applying it to the cell right above it. Then I go down here again with bellies and butts. I'm going to delete that one. And then look at over time. Now you can start to see as I'm comparing bellies to butts, excuse our name, and I look over time, I'm really not looking at a very high market share. So I'm in the lower end of my market share on my profit loss, and I'm also not seeing a ton of growth over time. If you use that learned formula of the dog star chart, this is one of those classes then that maybe is going to qualify as either a dog, or maybe because we've had some moderate loss over time, we're still seeing some participants. Maybe it's one of those that's just one of those that we leave alone, but we don't invest a lot of time and energy into it and let it kind of die out on its own. Then to look at another good comparison would be to go down to something like here, our area with Microsoft Excel Part 2. For comparing those classes 1/1, this is in a high end of our market share, and we see that we've had some pretty good growth over time with how that class has really evolved. That might indicate then that we've either got a star or one of those other programs that we can do even more spin-off. Maybe we need Microsoft Excel Part 3, or we need to offer more classes of Microsoft Excel to keep that growth happening over time. So again, just one way to do that, if your registration system can't do it for you, a good way to be able to pull some of that data and start to do some of those comparisons on how your individual classes are running over time. One of the other questions that's come up before is to make a dashboard like this. How do you essentially do that? The dashboard that I showed you in class is actually something that we're using with all of the different program coordinators have an individual document that has each of their programming areas by catalog season. What we did is very similar to what you saw in those previous sheets. We then sort by the different categories, and then we make these cells, these individual cells that have totals, pull back to this individual first page. So if you notice here, this is actually referencing pulling the equal sign and saying go back to fall 2014, and it's this cell, I want that information. Again, then you don't have to do constant updates and clicking back and forth to make those cells come across. With that, that's all I was planning to talk to you about. Please, by all means, if you're interested, contact me if you would like to have a mini session on this or get any deeper into it to see how we're using some of this data to inspire some different programming changes that we offer. But I'd be happy to share that information with you. My contact information, you can contact me through my email is probably the easiest. That's Corey Franson, CORY.FRANSON at ISD728.org. Or you can call us at the Community Ed office is 763-241-3520, and I'd love to to help you through a little bit more of this too, so you can start making some of the data-driven decisions using technology that we're experiencing here in our Elk River Area School District. So thank you very much for your time.